Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone that worked to make this conference happen. My name is Max Gamerman. I'm an undergraduate student at Carnegie Mellon University studying behavioral economics. I've been working with Professor Cleotilde Gonzalez at the Dynamic Decision Making Laboratory, studying stock flow failure and the correlation heuristic. In our research, we aim to examine the effect of piece rate incentive structures and loss framed mindsets in alleviating the use of the correlation heuristic in stock and flow tasks. The correlation heuristic is a mental pathway that causes individuals to assume that interrelated dimensions of a problem have similar visual structure. The reliance on the correlation heuristic in the context of stock and flow problems was acknowledged roughly 20 years ago by Sweeney and Sterman. They found that well-educated individuals didn't understand the behavior of material accumulations in systems over time. In one example, participants were presented with the information of the inflows and outflows of water in a bathtub and prompted to draw a graph denoting the level of water over the designated period. Participants performed poorly and relied on the correlation heuristic. Participants tended to hone in on minute details of the presented data and assume that the level of the accumulation, quote-unquote, looks like the graphs of the flows. As a result, even when all the necessary information to correctly solve the problems was available and no calculus or special training was necessary, the focus on irrelevant visual cues led to poor performance. We hypothesize that motivation plays a key role in such tasks. People can solve these problems as little skills are necessary and all the relevant information is available, but they are often not motivated to do so. In our experiment, we investigate the role of piece rate incentives and loss framing as essential motivators. Piece rate incentives directly tie payment to proper performance within the task. Further, giving them their total payment and taking away small portions for each improper unit of behavior invokes sentiments of loss aversion. This means individuals will work harder to maintain their pay grade than they would to incur equivalent bonuses. Currently, this is an underexplored intervention within the context of stock and flow problems. We hypothesize that inducing a loss-framed mindset through piece rate incentives will increase motivation and attention to detail in the context of stock and flow problems. Thus, participants in a loss-framed mindset will, on average, outperform their counterparts in other conditions with less effort-evoking motivators. Participants were presented with a survey involving 10 questions and one attention check. Each question describes an accumulation scenario. For example, consider the bathtub shown below. Water flows in at a certain rate and exits through the drain at another rate. Based on the graph of the behaviors of inflows and outflows of water, shown on the left of this slide, which of the following reflects the general behavior of the level of water in the bathtub over the designated period? Participants were then presented with the 4 possible graphs to select the answer from. One correct answer, which is the graph shown in the center, 2 options playing off of potential calculation errors, and 1 linear answer, which is the graph on the right of the slides. The selection of this linear option would imply the activation of the correlation heuristic, as this graph is a direct visual mimicry of the graph of the inflow and the outflow of the accumulation. We designated 3 experimental conditions which participants were randomly and evenly distributed across. Prior to the survey, each group was explained the conditions of their payment. The control group received a $2 flat rate for the completion of the survey. Participants in the gain frame, in order to effectively induce a gain-framed mindset, received a $1 base rate and would gain 10 cents for each correct answer, tying effort and success directly to correct responses. Participants in the loss frame, however, received a $2 base rate and would lose 10 cents for each incorrect answer, tying effort and success to correct responses. This is the exact same structure as the gain frame, but it is presented in terms of the amount of loss, hence loss framing. Beginning with a higher reward and taking money away should trigger the participant's natural propensity for loss aversion. We recruited 301 participants using Amazon's Mechanical Turk platform, 105 of which were women, 194 were men, and 2 were non-binary. The majority of participants were ages 25 to 40, but had participants as young as 21 and as old as 73. Using R, we cleaned the data and examined the different distributions of scores across each condition. The data indicates that participants in the loss frame do slightly better on average. As you can see in the violin plot on the right, the interquartile range of the loss-framed group trends higher, indicating that more participants had higher scores in this condition. However, running the significance test across the distribution of scores for each condition along with a chi-squared test, we were unable to acknowledge any statistically significant difference in scores based on the interventions. On a similar note, the proportion of participants that selected the linear option trended downward in the loss frame condition as seen in the violin plot on the left. However, again, we were unable to acknowledge any statistically significant difference. Replication of this experiment using larger piece rate incentives may more effectively induce loss framing and have a statistically significant effect. Our payments were incredibly low stakes, as $1 to $2 isn't a large sum, especially considering M-Turkers perform many of these tasks to generate some sort of substantial income. Our experimental design aimed to make people care, but $2 may not have been enough to care about. We were unable to support our hypothesis, so it is uncertain whether or not we can acknowledge that piece rate incentive structures and loss aversion play a role in inducing increased effort within the context of stock and flow tasks.